we go. Today we're talking about Ute history timeline, kind of some of the, just briefly going through some of the major events that have happened in Ute history, at least from like late 1500s to today. So some of these we'll spend a little bit more time on specifically as we go through Ute history. Just kind of depends on how much time we have. Usually there's a few of these that I do spend like a day or a half a day on that event just by itself. But yeah, I'm not sure if we'll have time enough this year. So let's see what we can do. So go ahead and grab a piece of paper because I'm going to have you take notes on some things. I'll have some information I'm going to be basically sharing on the computer so you can see it. But you're going to basically, I'm going to show you a timeline. This is, this is the paper version of the timeline, but I'm going to show it because I have it on my computer right now. So each of these pages, both the front side and the back side, you're going to pick basically 7 events that happened that you think are really important. I mean, a lot of the main ones I will say like, this is a big one, this is an important one. So I would definitely write down the extra notes, basically anything that isn't on here or on my screen, anything that isn't on the screen that I also mention when I'm talking about it, that's kind of like the stuff that I want you to write down about it. Okay, so you're going to be doing 14 things is the minimum. You can do more than that if you want to, but 14 is the minimum. And then when we're done with class, I'll just have you just turn your computer on or your camera on for just a second so I can see that you have done it. You're just going to write on a separate piece of paper. Keep your notes though for sure, because you're going to be using this, or there's going to be some things that you'll be using when we do kind of a written assessment later on. So definitely keep it so you can, have that for later. Yeah, and then for those who, if you're watching this later because you're making it up from being absent, then you just email me a picture of your notes so that you can get full points for today is basically what you'll do. Or you can type it into the question that will be about it at the end of watching this video. You can type your notes in there and that will be fine too. As long as I see your notes, then you get credit for today's class. Okay, so Kylan, do you have a piece of paper?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right. Let's share. And I'm still adding things that I haven't put back in there. So we're not going to do these ones today. I mean, I'll mention Squaw Peak, and I'll mention this one. I guess I could have mentioned that one too, but yeah, from Heather class. But anyway, so there's lots of stuff. There's like kind of 2 pages of these. So 7 of these and then 7 of these. So I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. Okay, so basically, we'll get started. So the most famous leaders and chiefs of the Ute tribe are Chief Ore, a chief's name that I cannot pronounce, so I'm not going to. Yeah, I can't pronounce that. And Tonga, who is Black Hawk, Chief Mora, Chief Pinto, Guero, Chavano, Sobita, Tapuche, and Chief Mauchik. So, and also the most famous wars that involved the Ute tribe are the Jicarilla War in 1849, Walker War in 1853, Black Hawks War in 1865, and Meeker Massacre in 1879. So, and we'll talk about all of those in here. Oh, wow, that place. Scroll down a bunch. Okay, let's get to where we can see the whole thing. There we go. So 7 of these you're going to be writing down as I talk through them. I will definitely make sure to mention which ones I think are really important, but I'm only going to be mentioning that with like 5 of these. So, if you also think something's pretty important, even if I don't say that it's super important, you can still write it down. Okay. All right. So let's start in just a second. Definitely they have a lot of talking for me. All right. Here we go. So 1580. Spanish make first white contact with the Ute tribe. So this is actually really important. One of the most important ones on this page, I would say, because the Utes trading with the Spanish turns out to be one of the most important things that happened in Ute history. It it has like this domino effect of all these things that happened that changed Ute history, for the better and for the worse in some instances. So it's got has to do with horses, has to do with relations with other tribes. I mean, the Spanish, when they came in, it basically changed all the dynamics with who the Utes are friends with and who they're not friends with. It changed a lot of that conflict there, and relationships that were there. But it's a huge thing because there's so much trading that happened with these groups. So establishing a long relationship between the Ute people and the Spanish. Okay, next one, 1626. This is when conflicts with the Hopi begin. This is mostly over trading in land, which you'll find a lot of these over trading in land. 1637 is when conflicts with the Spanish happen. So it's, about 57-ish years since they first made contact with the Spanish. And these conflicts, I mean, it lasted for a long time, but these conflicts, it didn't mean that trade ended, but it was just this ongoing just tension between these two groups, because you never know if a trade deal is going to go good or not because of the conflicts that have been starting to happen over trade. 1637, the other one, this one's another huge important one, and the Utes acquire the horse. Now, historians do disagree on if it's the Utes who acquired the horse first or the Comanches who acquired the horse first. But I mean, either way, it was a Shoshone type of people, part of the Shoshone family who acquired the horse first. So of course that spread out to all the other Shoshone family tribes very quickly. But this one is super important because this is what led to a lot of the changes that happened in the 1800s. As the Utes are, expanding, it's expanding. That's basically what the horse does for the Utes, is allow them to expand and get places quicker, be more successful in hunts. And it also allows them to be more of like a force to be reckoned with. We mentioned in our Utah Native history, we mentioned how they were kind of aggressive, especially towards the Paiutes. They would go on raids against the Paiutes and the Navajos, but they'd capture slaves and they'd trade it with the Spanish. So that trade with the horse really just amplified what the Utes can do. So it really made them a fearsome people, basically, to have to deal with. 1692, we have alliances that start kind of showing up. Mostly it was, this is part of the 150-year conflict that the Utes had with the Spanish, that as soon as the Navajo came in, and yes, there's a typo right here with Pueblo. I change it right now. There we go. Done. No more typo. So basically we have the Hopi, the Paiute, Comanche, and Apache will join together, and they go against the Spanish and the Pueblo and the Navajo. Basically it was, hey, the Navajos came in, oh, you're with the Spanish, okay, so we're against you. So that was kind of a start to this bad relationship that the Utes have with the Navajos. And then 1730, that Ute Comanche alliance was over, and I mean, they had been allies and friends for a very long time. So the alliance was over because of a trade dispute. Trade and land, just like with the Hopi, trade and land, that's really what all these disputes are over, and little wars are over. 1781, so this is where we have a smallpox epidemic that comes through the Ute people and a lot of the other tribes in this area. So now let's think about the numbers for a second. By the mid 1800s, so during the space of 1780s to mid 1800s, you have 70 to 90,000 estimated people killed by that time. Now let's think of the number, just kind of going back and reviewing the number of Native peoples who were in Utah when the Mormon settlers arrived was estimated to be about 20,000 people. So if by 1847 there was about 20,000 people in the whole state of Utah, and then we have just 60 years prior, we have at least 100,000. That means like 80% of all the Native peoples were killed from these epidemics. That's a lot of people. I mean, it's at least 80,000, at least 80%. Well, that's where it's estimated to be. So that's a pretty big deal. The tribes out here, they have their run-ins with disease and epidemics. Specifically, smallpox was the biggest one at the time. We have that here in the late 1700s, whereas it was like the mid to late 1600s that was on the East Coast. So it took about 100 years for the epidemics of diseases to go across the country, basically. And a lot of the smallpox epidemic that came up right there was through the Spanish, and then some with the fur traders and trappers who came across to the state. This next one was a really important one as well, 1800s, with the adoption of Plains culture. So basically that horse that we talked about, the usage of that horse is really what transformed the Ute tribe. They were mountain people originally. Utes were mountain people. They lived in the mountains typically, and then during some seasons would be the mountains, some seasons they would be in shade houses. So but mostly they were just mountain people, lived within the mountains or nearby the mountains. Once the horse starts coming in, that's when they started the cultural diffusion that we talked about. Basically, cultural traits diffuse with each other, so they start adopting some things that other tribes do. So this is where the Utes adopted the Sundance, the teepee, and more like a nomadic lifestyle where they're moving around a lot more. So this was a big change for the people within the 1800s. It really changed their way of life, and it turned them into more of like a plains tribe. Some people will refer to the Utes as a Plains Indian tribe, and that's a big change from the mountain type of tribe that they used to be. So that was a big one. All right. Do you have any questions so far as we go through? We're a little bit over halfway there. Do you have any questions so far?
No.
Okay. All right. We'll keep going then. Oh, especially because we got 20 minutes. All right, we gotta go. All right, the 1840s, we have Ute land was eroded just a little bit, mostly by the Utes were attacking the Taos Valley in New Mexico, and basically for reallocation for those, or what word was I saying? Retaliation. I think I said reallocation. Retaliation for those attacks. Basically, they pushed the Utes back up. So it's kind of like that southern border of Ute land. They were pushed back up as retaliation against the attacks Utes did on the Taos Valley. 1847 was another big one. That's when Mormons came into Utah. They started by living in those buffer zones, if you will, between the Shoshone and the Utes, and kind of the areas that were more like hunting, fishing grounds. And then as they expanded, they pushed more and more into Ute territory and just started displacing more and more Utes. So we have displacement of land. We have the spread of disease because, starting in 1847, just the next year, we have another large, not as big as the first one, but another huge spread of diseases that killed off a bunch of people the year right after. So, that was a huge issue. And then with starvation, as the white settlers start increasing in size, that's more land that the Utes cannot hunt or fish on, and that reduces the amount of food that they're able to get for their people, and more starvation happens. And in fact, Mormon settlement, that was kind of one of the root causes of some of these wars that we will mention later on, but also some of these things I had yet to add to here. this Fort Utah War was a war between Mormon settlers and the Ute. Ute was killed, and they demanded a white life as retribution, and the Mormons refused, and then that just escalated into a war. Not too many died. It was kind of a small scale war, if you will. It was like maybe a dozen people died. It wasn't that much. And then Squaw Peak, the name of Squaw Peak comes from a story where in Utah Valley you have this battle going on between the Utes and the Mormon settlers, and instead of fighting with their bullets, they just said, we'll save our bullets, we'll push them into the mountains, and then they'll either leave or they'll freeze. Either way we'll win, kind of thing is kind of what they were saying. And so they pushed the Utes in the mountains, and then there was a woman and her child who survived, and at the top of the peak, and there would be this smoke that would come up from the campfire, and they'd always be wondering where's that smoke coming from, and they found out that it was from the woman who was surviving up there with her child. And according to the stereotypical way that you would address a Native woman, they called it Squaw Peak. So that's where that name Squaw Peak comes from in this story, kind of like the gist of that story behind it. Okay. All right. Jicarilla War was mostly a war of the Jicarilla Apaches against the U.S. government. This war was started because the Apaches were not happy with the fact that they used to be trading with the Spanish, and they used to be pretty good, trade relationships. They were seen as equals and treated well. And then once Mexico had basically claimed independence and Spanish was no longer there, then they had to turn to U.S. government or Americans to trade with, and they weren't treated as well. So their raids were partially because of that treatment that they had, and this mistrust that started forming between the Apaches and the Americans. And so that's kind of some of the beginnings and root causes of this war. And the Utes just kind of joined with this. Really the Apache, who were fighting against them, but there were many Ute warriors who joined with them, and were a pretty big part of that war. 1849, the treaty itself isn't so significant, but the fact that this is like the beginning of treaties that were signed with the U.S. government makes it important. So 1849, the first treaty with the U.S. government between the U.S. and the Ute people. And then we have the Walker War in 1853. This is another big one. The Mormons really didn't like how the Utes had slavery. They also didn't like that they were trading with New Mexico. So, there was also disputes over trade and over raids that the Utes did to the Mormon settlers, which were, from starvation. So that started this Walker War, which was a pretty large war. Sorry. I'm very tired today. So we're on. Okay, so did you get seven things to write down from this first set of events?
Hello.
Hey, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay, so are you good?
Yeah, I'm still writing it down though.
Okay, so take a second to keep writing. Let me know if you have any questions, and then also just let me know when you're ready, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the next set, which I need to still zoom out just a little bit. Come on. Oh, I want a little more than that. All right, screw it. We're good. Okay. All right. And okay, so there's one more that happened 1850 actually, which we skipped. One war that happened was the Fort Utah War, where we have, it's down here. was a Timpanogos band, or Timpanawatch band, fighting with Mormon settlers after Ute was killed. And that whole thing, that was 1850. So, but we already mentioned that. So the Ute War starts where basically Chief Tierra Blanca attacks Fort Pueblo, which was a trading post, basically, over increasing conflicts over land and food. And some people call it a massacre. This war that happened there, which, you know, there was quite a few people who were killed at the fort. But that's what it was over, land and food. 1861 is another big important one. The Uinta Reservation was created in 1861. So President Lincoln, same war that Civil War begins, the same war that the Uinta Reservation, which if you looked at a reservation map, there's like those two, I don't know what you can see at the top. I hope you guys can see this the right way, but it would have, there we go. So it'd have the Uinta Reservation up here and the Ouray Reservation down here, which is the Uncompahgre Reservation. So it's kind of like what we have today is the Uinta and Ouray reservations are combined, right? So the Uinta part of the reservation was created today in 1861. Most of the Utah Ute bands were put in here. So we have the Timpanawatch, the Sayipich, the Sandpitch, Uintaats, all of those Utah bands were put into the Uinta Reservation. This is also the reservation they were trying to put other Utah tribes into, was into there. And then 1865, the Black Hawk War was just another of the major wars that happened. So definitely a big important event. So Antonga, who his name is Black Hawk, but or his real name is Antonga, but he's called Black Hawk too. Basically, it all started with this theory that someone claimed that he had stolen some cattle, so they wanted, payment back, and he's like, no, it wasn't me. So they ended up killing somebody. The whites ended up killing somebody, and then just like a lot of the same kind of pattern happened with a lot of these events that happen with, at least in our state and definitely in other states as well, is usually starts because of something, small. And then these guys retaliate in a bigger way, and then these guys retaliate, and it just gets bigger and bigger, and it expands into this major event. So that's kind of what this one was. It started with just some little thing about cattle, and then it led to a war where people were killed. So, but the thing I like about Black Hawk's story is after the war was over, the Utes lost. And after the war was over, he actually went around to the different Mormon settlements that were involved with this fight, with this war. And he essentially was being the bigger man. He was like, I'm sorry we had to have this war. I'm sorry it happened. I would still do it again because my people are starving. And that's why we were in this war. That's why we were stealing and raiding, because we were starving. So it's either steal and raid or die from starvation. He said, I had to do this to protect my people. And, it really opened up a lot of people's eyes to like, oh, this, like, yeah, I kind of get why they're doing that. They're not just cold-blooded people who are just killing people. They're doing this because they're starving, So I think that really helped a lot of relations between the Mormons and the Utes. But I mostly like sharing that story because I really like Black Hawk's story and how good of a leader he was. And he was just a good person, You don't really meet a lot of leaders that are just a good person. 1868, we have the Colorado Reservation, where basically they signed this treaty where the western third is, if you were to split Colorado into like 3 sections, up and down, the western third is the area that was basically signed to the Utes. And Chief Ouray was selected as the principal chief for all of the Colorado Ute bands. 1870s, we have appropriation and land loss throughout many points of the 70s. The Southern Ute and the Mountain Ute tribes They relocate to where, you know, their tribal reservations are today. So they moved there. The Bruneau Agreement signed off to sell a lot of that Colorado land that they just got, you know, a couple of years ago. 12 million acres of Colorado land was relinquished in that Bruneau Agreement. 1879 is another large, big deal. Meeker Massacre. I know that some people tell this story about the Meeker Massacre. So basically, Meeker was a Indian agent in Colorado, and he was a U.S. Indian agent, so he was white. And his job was to, you know, be the mediator and be like the middleman, if you will, between the government and the tribe. And so the treaty that was signed for the Colorado reservation for the land that was left, it was signed to be like, okay, whites can't come in this area. But once they found gold, they started pouring in. These miners were basically invading the area. And so the youths went to Meeker and they're like, hey, are you going to do something about this? They're violating the agreement, and basically did nothing. So what the youth decided to do, this is mostly the White River, I think. Either White River or Uncompahgre. I can't remember which one. I don't remember. So hard because I have so many facts in my mind right now. I'm meshing them all up together. But it's one of the two, which, you know, it's not 3 different bands it could have been from. But they basically went to Meeker. They killed him and like 5 of his men, and they kidnapped a woman and a couple children. And this massacre that happened, you know, killing Meeker and his men that were in there, was the massacre that, I mean, white people were just, you know, they used this, it was an outrage, and they used this as the reason to put them into a reservation and displace them entirely out of Colorado, which is what happened in 1882. So it kind of leads to the next one, which also is a huge event. This is when the Uncompahgre Reservation was created, which is also the Ouray Reservation today. It's called Uncompahgre Reservation because Chief Ouray was the chief over the Uncompahgre. So, you know, it could be called the Uncompahgre Reservation or the Ouray Reservation. Either way, the same, you know, talking about the same thing. So 82 was when that was created. And then we have the Uinta and Uncompahgre reservations are joined in 86. So, so yeah, that was only like 4 years that they, you know, to wait to join them. But yeah, so you have all of the Colorado Utes were displaced out of Colorado and put into Utah at that point. Okay, 1895, we had the Weminuche move to Southern Ute Reservation, and then they become Ute Mountain Ute. And then also in 1895, in the next couple of years, land allotments were distributed to Southern Utes, and they started getting land. Basically, these land allotments would be like 40 acres, not much. Oh, I've got 4 minutes. Okay. Beginning of 1916, we start having conflicts over water rights. Basically, when they sign off land to the Utes, they didn't really talk about water rights and whose right was the land in these contracts, these treaties. So basically, you have these white settlers who start coming in and taking some of that water. And what we have as a long-term effect of this is still today for the Ute tribe, there's almost every single year it's a water shortage. So, you know, if they had been able to keep all their water, like this probably wouldn't be an issue, right? If people weren't coming and taking it. 1934, a big one, big one, Indian Reorganization Act. That's the event that we talked about with the positive events where the government decided that tribes should have self-determination, which means that they determine for themselves what happens on their land. They have tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction on what happens on their lands. Okay. So this is a big deal because it stopped allotment of land, it stopped giving away land, reservation land to white families. And then later on in 1945, all of the unclaimed allotment lands went back to the Ute tribe. So that was a really good thing. In 1948, we have the Hill Creek extension to the reservation. So if you know where that Hill Creek area is down south, and you know that was added in 48. 1985 was the beginning of several court rulings for jurisdiction. basically one of the stories as to the cause of this, just one of them, one of the causes, is there was a guy, a young man who got into like a shooting spree, I guess, with the highway patrolman. And so the tribe and the state of Utah had this disagreement on who has the right to prosecute that man for shooting, for going into that shooting spree. So it's like who has the right to prosecute? Should it be in the tribal courts or should it be in the Utah courts? So they had to look at jurisdiction on stuff like this in 1997 and in 2015. And there's even been more than that. So there's been multiple cases where the courts, even the Supreme Court, has said the Ute tribe has jurisdiction over their land. They have the right to prosecute, but the state has violated that many times, especially in the 80s and 90s. And then 2016, the Bears Ears reduction, that, we mentioned it a while ago in class, but, losing a bunch of Bears Ears, which include the Utes and the 5 tribes who it directly impacts their land, their trust land. And then 2016 to 2018, a lot of tribes, their treaties that were signed to give them reservations, like that was kind of like, if you will, an expiration date is within those years. It's the best way to like put it to help kids understand. It's kind of like they went to expire. So there was kind of like a legal fight that the youth had to go in to keep the Uncompahgre reservation, the Ori reservation, to keep it and not like have it just like, oh, well, too bad it's expired, because basically, I guess what was supposed to happen is they were supposed to do some things to like renew that reservation, position, but they didn't. So when they started taking land, they're like, no, that's part of the reservation land. So they had a little legal battle over it, and the youth won. So, it's reclaimed, basically, claimed again. But I also wanted to mention some things like in the early 2000s, we have youth businesses like the Plaza is starting to be established. In the 80s, Bottle Hollow Resort, when that was popular. Several lawsuits over treaty violations that have and land loss and land theft. There we go. Land theft that the government had to pay the Ute tribe several $1 million. So I don't even have like a full total, but I didn't get that soon. So anyways, do you have 7 of these that you have written down?
Yeah, I still need to write the other one, my last one.
Just email me the picture of your notes, okay? So you can finish up and just email it to me. Shoot me an email on Canvas. For those of you who are watching this movie to get caught up and get your points from today's class, you can either copy and paste your notes or take into the questions after this video, or you can just email me a picture of your notes, and that's how you get credit for today's class, is those notes. So